Hi, welcome. For a decade now, we've wanted to have everything in one, and we're buying more and more universal cars, SUVs and crossovers. Of course, manufacturers are focusing on this goldmine. Lexus, for example, if it weren't for the ES, would only have SUVs and crossovers in its lineup, right? Also in Toyota's lineup, these universal cars are already in the majority, and one of them is the Corolla Cross. Hi. And if we look at its specs, you'll see it's just the right size, has good performance, funny fuel consumption, and actually not even a very high price. Well, a guaranteed success, right? But for some reason, this Toyota model sells noticeably worse than the regular Corolla. Do you want to know why? I invite you to the test of the Corolla Cross, which after 3 years on our market has undergone a facelift. Thank you. Actually, I regularly spot crosses on the street, and I was convinced that they sell quite well. However, the facts speak for themselves. In 2024, 30,000 Corollas were sold, while the CHR Yaris and Yaris Cross each sold 15,000 units. Meanwhile, the Corolla Cross sold only 4,000 units, only. That's a good result, but it pales in comparison to its closest siblings. This car is almost 4.5 meters long, which means it's between the CHR and the RAV4. In 2025, it underwent a facelift that brought a heavily redesigned front and a few subtle changes that aren't necessarily visible to the eye. But more on that later. Now, for a moment, I want to go back to looking for the reasons behind the low sales. Generally, after the facelift, this car already looks a bit better, especially since we have the sporty-looking Gazoo Racing Sport version here. But compared to its prettier sisters like the Toyota CHR, for example, this car doesn't particularly impress with its sophisticated design, and that might be the first problem. As you can see, the Cross is not the most beautiful Toyota model, so it attracts customers who buy with their heads, not their hearts. By the way, the Corolla Cross in the Gazoo Racing Sport version wasn't available in Europe before the facelift, so this is a completely new thing. Besides this styling package, the version apart from the package was not available in Europe, and just like in other Toyotas from this segment, here under the hood you can have a 1.8 or 2.0 hybrid. These are 5th generation hybrids, which means they really spoil you when it comes to the balance between performance and real fuel consumption. The less powerful 1.8 has 140 horsepower, while the more powerful one has 178 horsepower. Now, as you may have noticed, it used to be 197 horsepower. However, now, after the facelift, the engine power has been reduced to meet the latest, increasingly strict standards. Nevertheless, I think that when it comes to performance, it won't be a big problem, because either way, it's enough for this car. My friends, the partner of this episode is Wehizpel, an automotive platform where you can find over 10,000 new and used cars. The platform cooperates with dealers of all brands, from popular ones to the most expensive. As you can see for yourself, with the hero of this episode and the code Zakharov, you'll get an additional 1% discount on wehiz.pl. So for example, in the case of a car worth 200,000, that's 2,000's Lotus extra discount on top of the discounts already visible on their website at wehiz. You choose a car, calculate the installment, get a financial decision, and sign the contract 100% online. Or if you prefer a traditional conversation, you can also do it with an advisor. Check the description where you'll find a link to thousands of cars you can lease. You're welcome, and now for the 0-100 km measurement result, I got 8.86 seconds. With a minimal, almost negligible drop, this result could have been much better. But for at least the first 2 seconds, the car was fighting for traction. Maybe it wasn't spinning in place and losing whole seconds, but we definitely lost a few fractions of a second because of it. Well, winter tires, winter conditions, so the grip is just so-so. And now for the fuel consumption measurement. At 120 it was 6.8, at 140 it was 8.6. However, city driving depends, of course, on your temperament, so it's from 4.5 up to even 6. The Corolla Cross can only have hybrids under the hood, So the transmission is always Toyota's electronic, continuously variable transmission with a planetary gear set. And don't associate this with a continuously variable transmission. While accelerating, since I have a good opportunity now, I'm on the expressway, driving at 100, and I want to accelerate to 120. Listen. And now it's 120. And it wasn't a steady increase, just the engine normally revving up to higher and higher RPMs. So this gearbox has already adapted to the user's preferences. Even though, technically speaking, it would be more efficient to set it at a single revolutions per minute level, the one that's optimal for the engine, and squeeze as much as possible out of it through the planetary gear. But if you want a simulation of a regular gearbox, you get a simulation of a regular gearbox. I mentioned back in the parking lot that some elements of the facelift aren't visible at first glance, but you can hear them. At least that's what Toyota claims, because apparently during this facelift, this car was made quieter, better on Toyota's scale. Still, that doesn't mean this car is completely quiet. Because now as I'm driving at 90, I can't say that it's perfect or ideal. I also haven't driven the pre-facelift version to clearly say there's a noticeable improvement, but if they added a bit of soundproofing, I could tell that from the doors. So we should assume that it really did happen. So you could say that this is one of the biggest and most well-known issues with Toyota, especially when it comes to driving at higher speeds. So it's good that they addressed this during the facelift. However, as I said, I haven't driven a Toyota before. Look, Toyota, it beeps at me when I'm going 70, 1/70. That's a bit much. And when I was driving on the expressway and the limit was 120, it didn't do that, no. It started beeping again, thinking the speed limit was 50 after reading it somewhere. I don't know why. A kilometer away from a side road, so it has good eyesight, but it doesn't always translate to peace of mind for the driver. Anyway, I didn't have a chance to drive this car before the facelift. This test is my first encounter with the Corolla Cross, and to be honest, I'm not at all surprised that it drives well. After all, the first thing that comes to mind with the Toyota Corolla isn't that it's going to be fast. However, what people don't talk about is whether it's fast or slow, or whether it's more or less economical. It really handles well. The regular Corolla, compared to the most well-known, best-driving cars, absolutely doesn't lose out. This is a car that truly knows how to handle corners. And here, considering that we have a slightly higher suspension and generally a more crossover-like body design, it could have been noticeably worse. But I don't know if it's because the body has been lowered back by 1 centimeter since this is the Gazoo Racing Sport version of this car. Moose test. Now, I won't show you how I'm driving down the avenues in Warsaw, but this car handled the moose test with real grace. The steering wheel turns lightly with no resistance, it darts to the left and then pleasantly returns to its lane. You don't even feel any oversteer here. There's not even any big trouble with the electronics. This car really handles such maneuvers well, at least in the GR version I tested. Besides that, when it comes to the aquarium visibility, everything is fine. When it comes to acceleration, there's nothing to complain about here, even though it lost a few horsepower. Driving on dry asphalt at around, let's say, 40, sometimes it can even lose traction if you hit the gas pedal harder. So really, if someone keeps repeating the story about the continuously variable transmission whining and that hybrids are only good when it comes to fuel efficiency, but they don't drive them. So let me tell you this, none of that applies to this car because it drives, it turns, and it accelerates. Before I move on to discussing the interior, let me do a little test. Do you remember what closing the door sounded like in the Toyota CHR I tested a year ago? What was the sound when closing the door? These doors make a booming sound. All four behave exactly the same, as if you slammed a sheet of bare metal. Let's listen to how it is in the Toyota Corolla Cross. It's not silenced, but it's refined. It sounds exactly as it should. After closing the very well-made door, we look at the cockpit to see any signs of a facelift, and it turns out that to find those signs, you have to look a bit lower. The top part is very familiar after all. We see it every time we take a taxi, right? Their crossovers could actually make pretty good taxis because people are constantly getting in and out of taxis. And with a raised car, it's easier. But probably that several thousand price difference makes a big difference for fleets, for taxis, and that's a shame. And coming back to the changes you have to look for lower down, it's about the center tunnel. Now, in every version, there's a wireless charger here. This whole panel is also quite nice to look at, but as you can see, there's quite a lot of piano black here, which, well, just look. We have only 2,500 kilometers on the odometer in this test car, and on this surface, we can already see the first permanent scratches. You can see it, you really can. It's a shame we don't like it, everyone knows we don't like it, and yet they still use it for interior finishing. Besides, it's a proven solution. You could say it's been used in millions of units. The cockpit layout, which you may or may not like, but it's comfortable where it needs to be analog and practical. And when it comes to storage, we already have the mentioned charger, a place for the phone on the other side, 2 cup holders, not a very big compartment under the armrest, and a glove box in front of the passenger. I think the door pockets are of normal size and quite spacious, of course. They're plastic. Why? Of course, you'll see that in a moment when I show you the interior, because here it's hard, here it's hard, there everywhere. It's still hard and hard and hard. However, there are a few spots that are finished with nice material. For example, here we have, look, it's soft, and lower down as well, which isn't so obvious. This whole strip on the door is also finished. It's not super luxurious or anything, but it does give a little, it feels okay under your finger. However, the armrests could be a little deeper. On the left side, they hit the bottom pretty quickly, almost instantly, while on the right side, it's a bit deeper. But you can also feel the hardness, and the overall fit and finish is typical for Toyota. So all these elements, when you tug on them, as you can see, they move quite a bit, but they don't make any sounds. Look here, for example, this part moves, but it's quiet. Here too it moves, but doesn't creak. Here it's probably the same. Yes, it moves, but there's no creaking. It's silent. And here and everywhere else it's the same. You can see that it's very solid and safe when it comes to creaking, so in that regard there's absolutely nothing to complain about with Company I. And finally, I'll mention a strange limitation when it comes to configuring the Cross in general. Not only the Gazoo Racing version, which also has beautifully accented seats with that red stitching and the Gazoo Racing logo, so it looks nice. But these are the seats. Just look at the side support. It looks great, but the right seat doesn't have height adjustment, and that's not available for any amount of money in any version, even the top executive trim. Only the driver has that privilege. Let's also check the illumination at night. The buttons on the steering wheel are backlit. Under the steering wheel here is the start-stop, here on the left side, the steering wheel heating control, which is very useful, and also the lights. On the right side, there's the climate control panel. The screen is not backlit. This panel for charging mobile phones only has a small indicator light showing it's ready. Here we have all the buttons illuminated. Here we have the seat heating, but the cup holder spaces are not illuminated. The compartment under the armrest isn't illuminated either, but the glove compartment in front of the passenger is illuminated on the right side. Generally, only this strip on the door is illuminated, and there's another strip like that on the driver's door. In the back, there are no such strips anymore. So basically, when it comes to LEDs, that's the only entertainment in the car. However, this LED on the left side is also useful because thanks to it, we can actually see that there are buttons here for controlling the windows. I'll show you how the reversing camera works. This is how the reversing camera works. It's dark here, so you can see some noise, but generally, you can see everything as it should be. Music. It's time for the 2-meter-tall person test. And here we encounter a rather characteristic problem that can be seen in some Toyota and Lexus models, namely the setup is made for, well, a shorter driver. Here the seat is already lowered as much as possible, and the steering wheel is already pulled out and raised as much as it can be, and it still practically rests on my thighs. Look, and in relation to the steering wheel, I'm a bit too far away precisely because I can't pull it any closer. I could possibly move 1 notch forward because there's space under the steering wheel for my knees, but then there's a problem with getting out because my right knee won't fit under the steering wheel anymore. Comfortable. It's still doable like this. So I'm missing a few centimeters, but above my head I still have a few centimeters of free space. Here there's actually a sunroof, so it could have been better if it wasn't there. Anyway, I fit in, it could always be better, but I don't lack space. There's a bit less space in the back. Look, my knees have already landed in the driver's seat, but in the part that has some structural elements, it's not too comfortable above my head. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a lack of space again. When I'm slightly hunched over, I might not feel it, but when I do the 2-meter test and straighten up, well, unfortunately. However, interestingly, there's really plenty of foot space. You could actually lower the driver's seat a bit, at least from the perspective of someone sitting behind the driver. I can be glad that there's no lack of space there. So let's say there's a bit missing here, a bit missing there. I've seen cars with more space for 2 people who are 2 meters tall, and when it comes to amenities in the back, there aren't many. All right. Undoubtedly, the message is that we have air vents here, and we also have a central tunnel, which is probably a structural reinforcement. Well, we don't have rear-wheel drive here, and even if we did, it would be electric. Notice that we don't have a pocket behind the driver's seat on the left side, but there is one on the right. Also, we don't have door pockets, but of course there are cup holders in the doors. At least that's something, but honestly it's really just for the person sitting on the left. The only pocket is the armrest, but notice that the armrest isn't very easy to access. I mean, there's nothing sticking out that you could grab to pull it open. So we use our long fingernails, if we have them, and stick them in here between the upholstery, grab it and pull, scratching our long nails in the process, open it up, and there are 2 more cup holders. So really, we have 4 cup holders available here. Actually, there's no ski pass-through. The armrest is quite comfortable, of course, depending on the sunroof, which is large and gives plenty of space. There's also a sunshade, a light, and plenty of headroom. The backrest of the bench seat can be adjusted, although the angle is basically either more upright or more standard, and that's it. And when it comes to the ISOFIX mount, just take a look at how it looks. You never know what will open first, whether this frame will come off, because that's how it's attached to the upholstery. We pull it out very close. The mount is very convenient. However, I always say in this situation that these separate plastic pieces, which later get lost, are not a good solution. It would be better if they stayed here, somehow opened up, lay flat here, and remained here. But now I have to struggle with this a bit. And what is the trunk capacity? Well, it depends, and it really depends, because if there's a 1.8 under the hood, the trunk has a pretty large 473 liters. However, if there's a 2-liter engine under the hood, the capacity drops to 425 liters. That's exactly what we're looking at now. Why is that? Well, it's because the 12-volt battery has been moved here to the right side in the back, and I get that. Although it's not really for better weight distribution, it's just actually here, as we've seen. However, why is the difference as much as 50 liters? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that if we choose the rear-wheel drive version, meaning all-wheel drive or this kind of pseudo 4x4, then there will only be 390 liters left here. And honestly, that already puts the assumptions of this model, meaning its versatility, into question. And besides that, we have a hook here, a hook and a little light. Here we actually have the rich JBL version, and a cover that, as you can see, works in an old-fashioned way without any guides. In addition, there's a nice rubber mat on the trunk floor, and under the floor we can see a couple of small compartments for gadgets like a repair kit. And this is what the trunk looks like after folding down the backrests. Of course, there's plenty of space, but you can also see a significant difference in height here. An interesting thing is that here we have both buttons to close the trunk and a regular handle, which also starts the closing process. It's time for the highlight of the show, which starts at around 134,000 zlotys for the comfort version, and that's with the less powerful engine. The higher style version costs 11,000 more, while the extra charge for the more powerful hybrid is about 13,000 zlotys. The 2 top versions, like this Gear Sport or Executive, are only available in the more powerful version and cost around 170,000 to 180,000. As you can see, the difference between the cheapest and the most expensive version is about 50,000, which is rather reasonable. The difference in rolls also looks reasonable, at about 15,000. And even that doesn't help the Cross, because look at the Yaris Cross. There, the extra cost over the regular Yaris is much higher, but the Yaris Cross sells just as well as the regular Yaris. Why is that? There are several reasons for this anomaly. In smaller cars, it works differently. The extra charge for a crossover in the Yaris changes its capabilities and the perception of this car. In a higher segment, the Cross is not that much of a revolution. Besides, the Corolla is the default car in Poland. It's a fleet car for taxis. Cheap, proven, practical, economical, reliable, and available in several body styles. Besides, the recreational active vehicle 4 isn't much more expensive than the top versions of the Cross, which doesn't help the Cross compete with its older sister. This isn't a car without you. I found a few of them. However, the real reason for the Cross's lack of success compared to its siblings doesn't lie in the flaws of this model, but in the advantages of its other attractive sisters. While the Corolla Cross has its strengths, she isn't really one of them, except perhaps her modest looks. And this, well, yes, subjective problem might be that last little brick that makes customers less likely to choose this. Ugly duckling. Of course, in the fairy tale it later becomes a swan, but I'm not convinced that Toyota is preparing such a beautiful ending for the Cross. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Remember to subscribe and see you in the next videos. Bye.